Example 5. Crohn's is an incurable inflammatory disease of the intestines. It is relatively rare in the United States, where the prevalence is about 0.18%. Note, the population of the United States is about 320 million. Part A. Here are some data from a study of a new screening test for Crohn's disease. Use these data to estimate the accuracy of the test in terms of sensitivity and specificity. According to the table, 36 participants in the study who had Crohn's tested positive. Using this data, we can calculate the sensitivity of this test to be 36 over the quantity 36 plus 9, or 80%. Of the participants in the study who did not have Crohn's, 25 tested positive and 230 tested negative. Using this data, we calculate specificity for this test to be 230 divided by the quantity 230 plus 25, or approximately 90.2%. Part B. Consider a hypothetical patient who has tested positive for Crohn's disease. The patient wants to know whether the disease is actually present or not. This patient wants to know approximately how many people in the United States suffer from Crohn's for his population. To determine this, we first need to know approximately how many people in the United States suffer from Crohn's. Recall, we have that the prevalence of Crohn's disease in the United States is about 0.18%, and that there are about 320 million people in the United States. This means the number of people who suffer from Crohn's disease in the United States is about 0.18% of 320 million, which equals 0.0018 times 320 million, or about 0.58 million people. Part 2. Use the sensitivity of 80% and specificity of 90.2% to complete the following table, which shows the results we would expect if everyone in the United States were tested for Crohn's. Then find the ppv. Report your answers in millions and round to 2 decimal places. Let's start with the fact that we were given that the population of the United States is roughly 320 million. Next, from the first part of Part B, we have that approximately 0.58 million people in the United States suffer from Crohn's. Of that 0.58 million, some will test positive and some will test negative. Since the sensitivity of the test is 80%, we can count on about 80% of those who have Crohn's to test positive for the disease. 80% of 0.58 million is equal to 0.8 times 0.58 million, which is approximately 0.46 million. Since 80% of those who had Crohn's tested positive, 20% must have tested negative. 20% of 0.58 million is approximately 0.12 million. Notice the number of people who have Crohn's disease and tested positive, plus the number of people who have Crohn's disease and tested negative, adds up to the total number of people with Crohn's disease. Now let's work on the column that represents people that do not have Crohn's disease. We have that 0.5 million out of 320 million Americans suffer from Crohn's disease. This means 320 million minus 0.58 million, or 319.42 million Americans, do not have Crohn's disease. Since the specificity of the test is 90.2%, about 90.2% of 319.42 million, or approximately 288.12 million, people without Crohn's will test negative. Since 90.2% of the people without Crohn's test negative, 100% minus 90.2%, or 9.8% of the people without Crohn's will test positive. 9.8% of 319.42 million is approximately 31.3 million. To double check our answer, let's note that 31.3 million plus 288.12 million add up to the total number of people in the United States without Crohn's, 319.42 million. To further check our answers, we can find the total number of people who tested positive and add that to the total number of people who tested negative and make sure that the total is around 320 million, the population of the United States. Sure enough, the total number of people who tested positive is 31.76 million, while the total number of people who tested negative is 288.24 million. When we add those sums together, we get a total of 320 million. Now define the PPV and NPV of this test for the population of the United States. Recall, the PPV of the test is the probability that a person who tests positive actually has the disease. According to our table, if we were to test everyone in the United States for Crohn's, about 31.76 million people would test positive, but only about 0.46 million of those people would actually have Crohn's disease. Therefore, the PPV is approximately 0.46 over 31.76, or 1.4%. Now on to NPV. As you recall, the NPV of a test for a certain population is the probability that a person who tests negative does in fact have the disease. According to our table, if we were to test everyone in the United States for Crohn's, about 288.24 million would test negative, but only about 288.12 million of those people would in fact not have the disease. Therefore, the NPV is approximately 288.13 million over 288.24 million, which is approximately 99.96%. Note that our PPV of 1.4% means that if everyone in the United States were tested for Crohn's, only 1.4% of people who test positive would actually have the disease. The results of the example above seem to indicate that the Crohn's test is so ineffective that it is useless. This raises a big question. Why even bother with such a test if it is so ineffective in predicting the presence of the disease? Should a person who tests positive even be concerned? To answer this question, note that the PPV for this population is low because the prevalence of Crohn's in this population is low. Remember, the prevalence of Crohn's in the United States is just 0.18%. But because Crohn's is so rare, a doctor would never prescribe a test for it unless there was some evidence a person may have Crohn's. If we restrict our attention to the 3.3 million Americans whose profile suggests the possibility of Crohn's, the PPV increases to 64%.